Today, we're taking a look back at one of my favorite games for the Game Boy Advance, Castlevania, Aria of Sorrow. Before we begin, let me briefly talk about my history with the Castlevania franchise. Before I owned Aria of Sorrow, the only other Castlevania game I had ever played was Castlevania II: Simon's Quest for the NES. Although I did enjoy Simon's Quest a lot, what it didn't do was suck me into the Castlevania universe and made me want to go out of my way to play the other installments. However, Aria of Sorrow changed that for me. I enjoyed Aria of Sorrow so much that it made me want to go back and try the other Castlevania games I'd missed. So, I bought Super Castlevania for the Super Nintendo, and I absolutely loved it. Which in turn made me buy Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation, and I loved that game too. In combination, playing these three games, I became instantly hooked on the series. And over the years, I played any Castlevania game I could get my hands on. Although the 3D Castlevania games really aren't my taste, I did gain a huge appreciation for the 2D Castlevania games, and this was all set in motion by Aria of Sorrow. With all of that being said, it should be pretty clear now that I had a positive preconceived bias when it comes to Aria of Sorrow even before making this video. And though a look back isn't really meant to be a review, I think for purposes of full disclosure, it was at least worth mentioning. But that's enough about that. Let's get straight into the history for the game. Castlevania Aria of Sorrow was developed and published by Konami. The game was released worldwide in May of 2003 for the Game Boy Advance. In Japan, the game is known as Castlevania Akatsuki no Enryukyoku, which translates to English as Castlevania Minuet of Dawn. And speaking of Japan, surprisingly enough, the game did not sell all that well in the country after its release. However, the game fared much better in North America and Europe, selling very well and being highly praised by gaming media outlets at the time. Now, this is where I would normally take a few moments to talk about the other games in the Castlevania franchise, but the truth is I could easily spend 20 minutes or more just talking about the series as a whole. Just to put that in perspective, there are nearly 40 unique Castlevania games that have been released over a 30-year span. There is just no way I could ever do the series justice by talking about it in this video. That is a topic that deserves a video all of its own. So instead, let's talk about something that makes this game especially unique when compared to the other games of the franchise, and that is the time period in which the game takes place. It differs from most other entries in the series by the simple fact it takes place in a somewhat more modern time period. Whereas other games in the Castlevania series take place in the early 20th century, or much earlier, Aria of Sorrow takes place in the year 2035, which makes it the second most recent game in the Castlevania timeline. Its direct sequel, Dawn of Sorrow, being furthest along in the chronology, taking place in the year 2036. Since we now know the time period in which Aria of Sorrow takes place, let's go ahead and briefly dive into the game's story. The player will be taking control of a young man known as Soma Cruz. Soma is an exchange student currently living in Japan. One day, he and his childhood friend Mina Hakuba traveled to the Hakuba Shrine to observe the incoming solar eclipse. However, Soma and Mina are suddenly sucked into the eclipse and find themselves in a strange castle. Shortly after, Soma discovers that he is able to absorb the souls of monsters that inhabit this castle. A man he meets there who goes by the name of Genya Arikado tells Soma that not only are they now inside Dracula's castle, but also that Soma has what is known as the power of dominance, which allows him to summon the powers of a monster soul. Genya then tells Soma that he should travel to the Master's Chamber of this castle if he wishes to both learn more about himself and also how to escape the castle. There's actually a pretty decent story in this game, and it has a few twists and turns thrown in, but I'll let you discover them for yourself. Now onto the best part, and that's the gameplay mechanics. From viewing the game footage so far, you should be able to easily tell that Aria of Sorrow is a side-scrolling platformer. To traverse the various areas, the players will often need to be precise in their jumping while being careful to avoid enemies that could easily knock Soma back down to the ground. This is what you would expect out of a platformer, right? Well, this platformer is also very heavy in the RPG elements. At the top left portion of the screen, you will see two bars and a number displayed. The number and the red bar are used to gauge Soma's current health. The green bar is used to gauge Soma's current MP, which allows Soma to utilize his various abilities via the Tactical Soul system, which we'll go more into depth to soon. Like many other RPGs, Soma has various stats that affect how strong he is. These stats can be affected in a number of ways. The most basic way to increase Soma's stats is by leveling up. Now, I doubt I really need to talk too much about this system, because it's honestly the same system you've seen in plenty of other RPGs, but here's a quick rundown. When Soma kills enemies, he gets experience points. Once he reaches a certain amount of experience points, he'll level up and his stats will increase. Pretty basic for an RPG. The second way to increase stats is not that special either. Someone can find and purchase various types of weapons, armors, and accessories. Depending on the item equipped, his various stats will increase or decrease. However, some accessories don't increase a stat, but rather give Soma a special perk, such as receiving additional gold drops from enemies, or even increasing the chances of an enemy's soul being absorbed. The last way for Soma to increase his stats is via the tactical soul system, but once again, we'll talk more about that later. I talked about the various equipment Soma can purchase or find, but they aren't the only items in the game. Soma can also find and purchase various other items such as potions or maps. Once again, they are pretty typical of what you will find in other RPGs. These items are used for recovering health, MP, curing various status effects, and a variety of other uses. We're just about ready to dive into the tactical soul system, but first let's briefly go over combat and weapons. By pressing the B button, Soma can perform a basic attack with whatever weapon he currently has equipped. As expected, certain weapons have certain pros and cons. For example, swords tend to be fast and do moderate damage, but have a pretty short range, whereas weapons like lances are typically stronger and have a longer range, but attack much slower. And then you have a weapon like the handgun, which has a very long range, but does very low damage. The player will have to experiment with the various weapons and determine which type is best for a certain situation. Personally, I was fond of using swords for most of the game, but there were certain instances, such as in a certain boss fight, where I found a longer range weapon to be better suited to that situation. Also, some weapons can have special abilities. For example, the sword called Harunting has a chance of poisoning the enemy, making them take more damage than usual. And then there's my personal favorite weapon, Milliken's Sword, which can turn some enemies to stone. It doesn't work on every enemy, but it can be extremely useful on enemies that it does affect. But now it's time to get into what Aria of Sorrow is probably best known for, and that's the tactical soul system. The tactical soul system is basically what acts as the magic system for the game. When Soma defeats an enemy, he has the chance of absorbing their soul, which he can then utilize for himself, and these souls range from utterly useless to extremely powerful. In the menu, there is an option to choose called Soul Set. When the player enters the Soul Set submenu, they'll see that it is possible to equip the various souls Soma has collected. There are 3 categories of souls. The first category is known as the Bullet Soul. Bullet Souls are used to perform an instantaneous attack which will drain Soma's MP for each time it is used. For example, the very first soul Soma will obtain is one that allows him to throw a spear at the enemy. So each time the player presses up and B on the gamepad, Soma will use this soul he has equipped to conjure a spear to throw at his enemies. The second category is known as Guardian Souls. These are utilized by pressing the R button. Think of these souls as kind of like on and off. The longer the player holds the R button, the longer Soma can utilize the soul while it constantly drains MP. For example, at one point in the game, Soma will obtain a soul that allows him to turn into a bat and fly. However, MP will be drained the entire time Soma is transformed, and once the player releases the R button or Soma runs out of MP, he will transform back to normal. The final category is the Enchanted Souls. These are passive souls that can be equipped. For example, my favorite Enchanted Soul is known as the Headhunter Soul. This soul will increase all of Soma's stats based on the total amount of souls he has collected. So the more souls Soma absorbs, the stronger he will be. And then you have Enchanted Souls like Udini's Soul, which when equipped will allow Soma to walk on the surface of water. Udini's Soul is actually pretty important to mention, because some areas are impossible to reach without first capturing a certain soul. For example, Soma can't reach certain platforms unless he is actually walking on the surface of water and not just floating in the water itself. And then you have areas that can't be reached unless Soma turns into a bat and flies to them. There is one final type of soul, although these ones are a bit different. They are known as ability souls and aren't equipped in the soul set menu like all the other souls in the game. These grant Soma a unique ability that can be used at any time at no MP cost. These can be basic quality of life abilities such as pressing the L button to backdash, or more important abilities such as ones that allow Soma to reach previously unreachable areas. One example of this is with the Malphus Soul, which grants Soma the ability to perform a double jump. Now that we've gone over the majority of the game mechanics, I do want to pay tribute to one of my favorite aspects of this game, and that is the boss fights. Now, to be fair, not every boss fight is amazing, challenging, or even innovative for that matter, but there were quite a few that I had a lot of fun with. The boss fight that first comes to mind to me is the Battle with Death. This was by far, for me, the hardest and funnest fight in the game. To me, the fight with Death is exactly what a boss fight should be. Too many games like to double or triple an enemy's health, give them a little extra damage output, and then just slap the title of boss on them. They completely neglect the idea that a player would actually have to use their brain to defeat a boss, and that's something I despise in games. Although not entirely the role for me, if I can defeat a boss on the first attempt by going in and just slashing it to death, that boss sucked. And that's why I like the fight with Death so much. Unless you are seriously overpowered, you would not be able to just run into the boss room swinging your sword and come out victorious. It honestly took me about 5 attempts before I learned all of Death's various attacks and stages, and even then, when I did finally beat him, I was completely out of health potions and almost dead myself. And honestly, that's exactly what I look for in a boss fight. Nothing will give you a better sense of accomplishment than finally beating a boss on your 5th or 6th attempt and taking them down when you just have a sliver of health left. But let's move on to the big question. How has Aria of Sorrow held up over all these years? As I stated at the beginning of this video, I do have a positive preconceived bias when it comes to this game. But regardless, it's still holding up very well. Most of the complaints I have are just personal complaints and not actually a problem with the game itself. Like in pretty much every other Castlevania game I've ever played, the Medusa heads are still a huge pain in the ass to avoid. And it can be a bit overbearing since they come non-stop and petrify you if you get hit. But this is a minuscule complaint at best. There were also certain areas where I had trouble telling what was actually part of the level that could be used as a platform, and what was just part of the background art. I really only had this problem majorly in the clock tower, and obviously it was no longer an issue once I learned what could actually be used as a platform. And honestly, I have a feeling that this is a problem only I'm going to have. Aria of Sorrow is still one of those games that even after I recorded all the footage that was needed for this video, I still wanted to go back and finish the game and collect as many souls and then cover as much of the map as possible. Not many games still have me playing to 4 in the morning simply because I'm having so much fun. Even if you haven't played any other Castlevania games, Aria of Sorrow is a great place to begin. It's truly the game that sucked me in the franchise, and this is honestly probably my 4th full playthrough of the game, and I still enjoy every second of it from start to finish. I have zero hesitation in recommending this game to anyone, and I truly believe the most gamers will appreciate it and enjoy it as much as I have. This has been a look back at Castlevania Aria of Sorrow for the Game Boy Advance. I truly hope you have enjoyed this video because I had a ton of fun making it.